Welcome to live TV, everybody. Anyways, so we had an excellent screening of Kian's trucker documentary at Church in the Vine, and I think we have some footage, a little bit, that we can show people of how great it was. Amazing venue, even better people. No? Today's a catastrophe. Adam, what is going on with the show today? Okay, so we'll go from that to something else. What else is on the list of things to talk about today, Adam?
There's lots to talk about. I suppose we could talk about some of what we did on the weekend. We do have some of those things ready to go. I'm sure they're going to pop up in a jiffy from that. But there's no lack of stories to get into here, from plastic bans to sports institutions for swimming starting to bring on board some restrictions for trans athletes participating in that. No lack of things to get to. Sebastian Vettel being booed. There's a laundry list to pick from. What do you want to dive into first?
Let's talk about Sebastian Vettel, because he's a Formula One race car driver. He's a millionaire. And he shows up at the Montreal Grand Prix, and he's wearing an anti-oil sands shirt. And I wrote this up for the website because I was like, what is this guy thinking? And as I got poking around a little bit deeper, I used to actually be a little bit of an F1 fan, like maybe 20 years ago, but not so much. Yeah, can you? Not so much these days. And he shows up wearing this anti-oil sand shirt, and I'm like, you literally fly around the globe and then drive cars in circles, high performance cars in circles. And you show up saying you want to stop the tar sands, which I already know I already know you're ignorant. Once you have a shirt with that slogan on there, and he's riding a bike to show off his climate change street cred. Of course, his bike also has a pride flag on it for extra virtue signaling. But this guy is sponsored by Saudi Aramco, the world's most profitable company by market cap. At least it was last week. It overtook Apple. And that is thanks in no small part to Russia's war on Ukraine, which caused gas and oil prices to skyrocket, which is an interesting point to make there too, because this guy wants to stop Canadian oil and gas extraction. Okay. But his home country of Germany, by 50% of their natural gas comes from Russia. And so he's funding the Russian war machine. He's sponsored by the Saudis. And apparently through his political stances, he wants to unemploy vast numbers of Indigenous people who work in Canada's oil and gas sector. If I had to pick an industry in this country that was Indigenous, it would be oil and gas extraction. The Indigenous people are about 4 and a little bit % of the population. Employment of Indigenous people in oil and gas is at 8%, which means they're overrepresented as a sample size of the population in oil and gas extraction. So when you are against Canadian oil and gas, you're pro-Indigenous unemployment.
Yeah, this guy is just in the race and it's funny for an F1 driver, sheer hypocrisy with Justin Trudeau potentially in the lead, but this guy's catching up pretty quick. I don't doubt that the guy probably has a pro-Ukrainian stance or pro-Ukrainian flag while being sponsored and benefiting from Russia's invasion. Literally, I mean, for the guy to race cars that literally use not hopes and dreams but fuels to amass his wealth to tour around the world. He probably emits more emissions in a weekend than most of us do, probably right on par with farmers who are feeding thousands of people and not just himself. And then he has the audacity to come out here and lecture folks. It's right on par for the course for probably him and his sort of voting demographic, those people who still have the audacity to still support Justin Trudeau and people like that. So it's just such a gross look, just generally speaking. I don't know what I don't know if his sponsor clearly isn't advocating for him to be doing this. Then again, maybe they are, because maybe they only want
for sure
their
they
oil.
are. Yeah, of course they are.
Yeah, they want their oil that is like conflict oil, that is not sourced quite as ethically or as environment with. And we're talking about ethics as far as the sort of human costs as well as the environmental costs.
Yeah.
No doubt this is much worse on all of those fronts. But yeah, he has the audacity to come here. Why is it always Leonardo DiCaprio jet setting F1 drivers, these ridiculous, like if ever there's a place, I couldn't care less about carbon emissions, but like maybe some of these extremely wealthy people who are jet setting around the world, maybe they are contributing a little bit to those emissions in a meaningful way. And they're telling us to cut back our lives and walk to work. It's adorable that you rode your little bike for 3 minutes and then your F1 car burnt more emissions than I'll burn in a lifetime in one race. So yeah, it's embarrassing. You know what? I got to say though, for all the negativity, I am thrilled that this guy got booed. It's just an indicator that Justin Trudeau is not popular. These ideas aren't popular. They're getting their last sort of kick at the can while they can, but the tide certainly seems to be changing, and I'm certainly hoping that is for the better.
Yeah, F1 stops this year are in Spain, Monaco, Montreal, Italy, the United States, Australia. So we'll go to the other side of the world, Azerbaijan, and then, of course, naturally, Saudi Arabia. And I hear his defenders saying, oh, well, this is so concerning to him that he's thinking about leaving the sport. Oh, now that you've pocketed millions on the backs of oil and gas, now you're going to leave the sport. Yeah, goodbye. But give back all the money you made then. You don't want all that dirty tar sands blood oil in your pocket, right? Like if this were something you were really opposed to, but he's not. Yeah. He's just virtue signaling.
You know what he's doing? He's probably like, you know what, I'm getting a little bit older as an F1 driver, and inevitably, eventually, I'm going to need another job. So I'm going to start milking my way into either one of these oil companies or some WEF position on global issues. He's like, I'm a celebrity. I need to segue this. Reflex is slowing down a little bit. I need to segue my career into martyrdom, this time for the environment, or alternatively in the name of conflict oil. So pretty much par for the course. Speaking of par for the course, let's talk about this banning some single-use plastics.
Oh, gosh. Don't get me mad.
I'm about to go off. Remember, I mean, and this is the ridiculousness. Like, I remember when it was, oh, we're killing the trees, we have to get off paper bags, let's go to plastic. They're recyclable, we can do all this stuff. And then it's like, no, we actually meant the opposite, and we'll go the other way. You see plastic wrappers on these paper straws. You know what? You know what? Cool. If you can do a biodegradable straw that's not going to fall apart when I'm having my drink, great. But these companies out here professing that they're proud of their product, like A&W, and they don't want to put ice in it because it'll contaminate the drink, and then I'm drinking it through a newspaper. It tastes absolutely terrible. And literally, theaters, Starbucks, all these different places, they've gotten to the point where if someone gets a large drink, they're giving them a couple straws. So you're going through 3 or 4 straws instead of 1. Some of the original sort of lids they were doing to replace straws are actually more plastic than a conventional lid and a straw. It's just about as ridiculous as an F1 driver complaining about fuel. It doesn't really do much. And certainly the irony is the same people pushing this just had everyone using all of the masks forever, all of these single-use masks, to an extent that probably dwarfed straw usage in the country. Listen, if you want to use a reusable cup, fill it up, save some money, get a discount at a shop, cool. I know some places will give you a bit of a discount to do that. They save money. Sure, it helps the environment. That's great. Reduce. Good. The government, and I mean, we can talk about beef too here, but this Trudeau government just doesn't address serious issues. And then they just spend millions of dollars. And this is why they do it. It's because they can give their friends these contracts for things that aren't really verifiable. They spend millions and millions of dollars on these absurd little passion projects that don't mean anything. They signify nothing and accomplish even less. And that's exactly what this is. We're gonna count. It's the final countdown to banning some single-use plastics. Oh joy, oh joy. Ridiculous. I know people are going out of their way to stockpile and buy.
Oh, I am.
Yeah, buy straws
spoons.
now.
You know how many spoons my kids have thrown in the garbage, like my spoons, because I didn't have a plastic spoon, so I sent a metal spoon. They just throw them out because they get in the habit of just throwing stuff out. So all my spoons are in a garbage can at their school somewhere. And I'm constantly having to buy metal spoons because for a time, plastic spoons were kind of hard to find there for a while. I have stockpiled them. They'll take my plastic spoons for my cold dead hands. Before we get too far in the show, I forgot to tell everybody how they can have their say. So we are streaming on multiple different platforms: YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey, and Super U, and YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey, and Getter. So we're on YouTube. If we talk about things that YouTube says are dangerous, however factual, they will kill our YouTube channel. So before that happens, we might have to cut the feed there, but that's okay because we're on all those other platforms, Getter, Rumble, Odyssey, and Super U. And on Rumble, Odyssey, and Super U, you can engage with us on the show here, have your say, and support the work that we do here completely willingly. So on Rumble, you can leave a Rumble rant. On Odyssey, it's called a hyper chat. And on Super U, it's called a shout. Those are their paid chats. Send us a paid chat. We'll read it on air. Hopefully we don't have a technical catastrophe and we'll be able to get your message. And then we'll read it on air and we'll do our best to address whatever it is. And that's that.
Yeah, I was about to say, I think we missed that, but I wasn't sure if that was because of technical issues on my end. So I didn't want to weigh in there. So yeah, you know what? I wouldn't mind talking about that. We touched on that a little bit though, but I mean, this is just, we can talk about our Free the Beef campaign a little bit at freethebeef.ca, I think it is, .com, .ca, freethebeef.ca. This is just another of the sort of never-ending government overreaches. And I want to keep in mind, like, this government, I was just breaking this down today, like they're hard on all the wrong things and soft on all the things that they should be maybe a little bit tougher on. For example, we saw the Hands Off Our Guns campaign as well. The government, while literally reducing minimum sentencing for people who commit violent crimes with guns, are making the lives of legal gun owners far more difficult, far more hoops to jump through. And if you use a firearm, certain classes of firearm for often arbitrary reasons for target shooting, well, that is suddenly illegal. You can't buy them. Needless to say, people are running out buying this stuff, but a glaring hypocritical double standard that doesn't really accomplish anything whatsoever. They're doing the same thing with beef. There's obesity epidemics. There's food cost scarcity issues. There's all these problems out there. And meanwhile, while that's all happening, there's an opioid epidemic, and these governments are legalizing guns or drugs rather, left, right, and center. So drugs are fine. All this obesity stuff, we don't really need to address any of those serious sort of leading cause of death issues, but we need to put warning labels on relatively healthy and affordable ground beef in this country. Again, the single-use plastic bans, they're just so neurotically focused on making our lives inconvenient and driving up costs. Meanwhile, house prices are doubling. People can't afford mortgages. We have a generation for the first time in a long time where their quality of life is likely to decrease. They won't be able to afford houses, so on and so forth. It's over for this government. It's pretty apparent. Many people sort of suggesting that Justin Trudeau not likely to make it to the next election. The Liberals very possibly going to have someone else maybe come in and try and salvage the party, but it seems like they're trying to get their last few shots in with this absurd activism that absolutely nobody is acting for, sadly propped up by Jagmeet Singh and the NDP, who are entirely complicit despite the fact that they seem to want to blame the Conservatives and the Liberals for working together. It's clearly the NDP ramping up this madness in exchange for little favors and tidbits here and there. The government really, really needs to stop because the damage they're doing, it's going to take a couple elections to get over the damage caused by Justin Trudeau.
Yeah, I was doing some digging down onto this beef labeling because it's really quite bizarre. So they want to label special labels on food that contain at least 15% of the daily recommended intake of sodium, sugar, or saturated fat. Again, the science around saturated fats is some of the most sketchy of all the sketchy science out there. And I think the sketchiness of that science has led to an obesity epidemic and a diabetes epidemic. I think the diabetes epidemic is the reason that our healthcare system is in a constant state of near collapse. There was again, even this morning, like as I was sort of blow drying my hair, I was listening to a podcast about by a doctor about the historical records about diabetes. And it used to be like 1 in every like over 200 people being admitted to hospital had diabetes. Now, in some instances, it's 1 in 4. One in 4. And so maybe we're doing something wrong with the food pyramid. But then we've got governments like this who are perfectly fine to have ultra processed foods get around these food labelings. And they're really, they're labeling beef like it's a cigarette at this point. But it's the reason they did it to beef, and they were able to do it to ground meat. First of all, I think there's an ulterior motive in that it serves to normalize labeling meat as though it's dangerous, because you get 50% of all the beef in the stores by doing this. But they got them on a technicality, because you are not allowed to label whole foods with these labels. So you can't technically get it on a roast at this point any more than you could put it on an apple, or you could put it on a banana. That's a whole food. But because it's been ground, then it gets in there as a processed food, so they can stick it on there. And I say, okay, fine. You're labeling beef as though it's a processed food. Great. I want to see you label Beyond Meat for all the strange and dangerous things in there, including the soy and its effect on the male body. But they'll never do that because I think there's a whole like anti-masculinity thing. There's an affordable protein thing here. Your brain doesn't work properly if you don't have B12 and DHA and all those things that you can get from cheap, affordable, readily available, close to the producer beef. And
the other sort of thing here that is just so, and we've seen this through COVID-19 restrictions right across the board. Listen, McDonald's is likely not going to have these warnings on their burgers that they're pumping out day after day. And it once again, the mom and pop shop, like I was at Hartel Homestead the other day, some of these mom and pop shops, the local place, even your local grocery store that has some ground beef for you to take home, cook however you like, very likely, maybe do some foraging, whatever you might do, get that nice sort of healthy meal all together. That product that you see on the shelf that is relatively healthy, well, that's going to have a big warning label on it. But again, these big chain stores, these fast food joints, all these people and all these businesses, they're going to be sort of off the hook. And why is it that Justin Trudeau, who professes to be for the working class and the little guy, every action he takes, whether it's COVID-19 restrictions where the big chains got to stay open and the little mom and pop shops with relatively low volume got shut down. And now the local farmers being affected, but the big chains that are going to be pumping out fast food, they're not going to have these sort of marginalizing and vilifying labels on them. It's always the little guys who suffer. Yeah, exactly. And getting back to your thing about straws, I'm anti-garbage, right? Like that's why I don't like all the packaging things come in. But I'm very pro-plastic. And my concern is we are going to decimate an industry that we are going to need in the event of another pandemic. Single-use plastics were the saviors of the pandemic, especially early on, when the grocery store clerks didn't want to take your E. coli soaked reusable bag because they were scared of how COVID was being transmitted. And so these stores and municipalities that had banned plastic bags in their stores, they were like, send us all the plastic you got, because all of a sudden they realized it was far more sanitary. Your entire hospital is not only just plastic, but then all those plastic things are wrapped in plastic to keep them sanitary. And so what becomes of an industry that we need to keep us safe, we're attacking it now after it got us through all the stupid regulations of the pandemic. Like, look how much plastic was involved in the pandemic restrictions. I don't like the pandemic restrictions, but the government sure did. And secondarily, this war on plastic is kind of stupid when you think about what plastic really is. Plastic that's what I was going to say.
Is this magical inert stored fossil fuel. You don't have to put it in a barrel. It doesn't leak. It doesn't do anything. It's beautiful because you get to use it twice as a fossil fuel, as for its use, once as a fossil fuel and once for whatever you used it for, because you can high efficiency incinerate it and then create electricity. And for my hippie friends out there, you might not realize, but in Burnaby, BC, where they protest the Trans Mountain Pipeline all the time, they incinerate garbage for electricity there. In fact, when Canada shipped its garbage to the Philippines, and then we had to take it back because why are we just garbage colonialists? But when they shipped it all there and they had to take it back, it was sent to Burnaby to be incinerated to turn into electricity. And I think that's great. I mean, I think that's probably more efficient and more purposeful than just recycling for the sake of recycling.
And you know what I mean? The other thing too is it's like the ironic petroleum byproduct made kayak being paddled up to a Greenpeace protest.
Yeah.
The thing is these resources are sort of out there. They're available. They're being sort of repurposed and used. So rather than going to waste, they're going to do these incredible things within society. We're stripping that all away, and again, we're now producing these bags, not necessarily always out of those repurposed bags. Obviously, sometimes bags are recycled, but we're basically doing away with an industry that is just purposing things. It's kind of like the vegan who's opposed to leather. Well, people are still eating cows, so what do you suppose they do? Just throw all the skins away? You may as well use in the sort of indigenous style of using every single part of the animal, using every single part of the product. Well, why aren't we having the same mentality when it comes to petroleum byproducts out there? So yeah, instead of chopping down a tree, may as well use what's being produced in other industries that are needed and being attacked. And it's so funny, every one of these practical industries that does something that we need is being attacked by this government, sadly, here. And then they're seemingly endorsing everything that we don't need. Speaking of Canada, however,
just before you move on, though, I just want to drive the point home that this seems to be a de facto war on the West, whether it's beef, whether it's a war on plastic, which is just a downstream war on oil and gas. It's the Liberals in Ottawa deciding that these Western industries don't need to go on because they're dirty and gross and bad for your health. So they say, as they eat their Beyond Beef burger or Beyond Meat or whatever that thing. It's gross. Anyway.
Yeah, looking out the window, and now the skies are pretty darn clear. If you go to one of those car manufacturing cities, though, they've chased most of the business away. A little bit more pollution than we're experiencing up here or up in Fort Mac. So, they can take a look in the mirror for a second. On that note, despite all this and despite our net politicians, Canada Day is coming up, and despite all their efforts to cancel it and shame us, if you're one of those Canadians out there who is still proud of this country, despite some of the things Justin Trudeau is doing. We do have some stuff for you to check out at rebelnewsstore.com. We've got a promotion. You can actually buy one item at regular price, get 25% off your next item, free global shipping. I think it's over $100, but some pretty cool stuff there. And it's great because we don't reach into your pockets every month. We don't take hundreds of dollars a year from you through your taxes like the CBC or these other guys. We just rely on you to say, hey, you know what? It's important.
There's no limit on. I don't think there's any limit on the free global shipping.
So it's just free global shipping. So that's great. Yeah. Go get something. You can get buy one item, buy one get, regardless of what you spend. Free global shipping there. It comes pretty quick. If you want it for Canada Day, I would get your orders in pretty quick. The code is Canada25. So rebelnewsstore.com. Canada25 for that deal. Yeah. There's some good stuff on there.
Do we have a Dominion Day one in there for David?
We do have a Dominion Day one. I'm pretty sure.
There it is. Perfect. Yeah. There it is. Yeah, we couldn't not have a Dominion Day one in there. We'd never hear the end of it from him. No, Dave would be upset. So we have got that. So do consider that. Again, you're grabbing a shirt, you're getting something fun, but ultimately you're kind of keeping us here working because we don't steal from you through your taxes. We just say, hey, if you want to chip in, help us out. And again, that's one way to help. You can do a super chat. We love to engage with those as well. So keep those coming. If you have any thoughts on any of the things we're discussing today. Can we move into Chrystia Freeland here? Because this is, again, on the same theme of the Liberals' war on the West. So...
on Canadians too,
on Canadians too. But I mean, she acts as a scarecrow for oil and gas investment because of all their stupid regulations and then the carbon tax. And like, why would we go to southern Saskatchewan when we can just go to North Dakota? It's the same oil field, it's the Bakken. We'll just go over there where there's no carbon tax, fewer regulations, and it's easier to drill there. So why would we go to southern Saskatchewan, right?
The Daniel Day-Lewis milkshake. I drink your milkshake.
Yeah, exactly. So Freeland, instead of saying like, oh, for example, Alberta is doing this, and I've got a lot of criticism for our provincial government, but they quit collecting the provincial portion of the gas tax because gas is so outrageously high here, and families are being hammered with inflation. So they said, you know what? We're not collecting our portion of the gas tax. We can't do anything about the federal taxes, but we won't collect our portion. So I think that knocked about 13 cents off the pump. But not Chrystia Freeland, who is so adept. She's our finance minister, who, when she was at Reuters, destroyed an entire division of Reuters through her bad management. She literally destroyed it. And like, she destroyed the financial and business case for the section of Reuters that she was involved in. And Justin Trudeau's like, you know what? You're in charge of the economy. So anyways, she bragged at an International Monetary Fund panel that she increased the carbon tax despite record high cost of living and gas prices for Canadians. She says this is indicative of their commitment to fighting climate change. For me, it's indicative of her commitment to putting Canadians in the poorhouse. But anyways, look at this like completely out of touch clip.
Say a couple of things. Canada actually, and this is, I believe now I'm speaking not just about my own political convictions, but about where the majority of Canadians are. We have reached a point as a country where we recognize the urgency of climate action. We recognize that climate change is a threat to us here in Canada. We recognize that it's a threat in the whole world. And we recognize that we have to do something about it. And, I spoke to you earlier about our price on pollution. That's a very powerful market-based mechanism. It's going up every single year. And we increased it this year, even in the face of higher inflation. And to me, that shows a meaningful commitment. And we also recognize, we have to do our part in Canada, and we also have an obligation to do our part in the world. And I spoke at the beginning about the need about Canada's decision to double our provision of international climate finance to $5.3 billion.
5.3 billion. That's what we're putting into this. Families can't, afford their mortgage. Interest rates are going up. And she's like, 5.3 billion. That's what we're committing to this. Plus we've raised the carbon tax. Look at how great we are. This is insane. Has anybody, by the way, you want to see something really telling about Chrystia Freeland? Watch her with the sound off, and you'll see how just antsy that woman is. There's something really wrong with her. And I don't know if she's got some sort of disorder or anxiety or whatever, but it's very clear when you watch her with the sound off.
I think it's an act, but that's another story altogether. This is just insane to watch. She's like, listen, I'm so committed to this. I'm willing to let Canadians suffer. That's effectively what she's saying here. She's like, listen, we know things are bad out there. We know inflation's bad. Justin and I are going to continue jet setting around the world, doing whatever we want, kind of willy-nilly, abiding by COVID rules, depending on what people are doing, talking about climate damage, and then instead of zooming in, flying into every single event, consuming exorbitant amounts of resources, alcohol, food, all this stuff, having a massive imprint. And I'm willing to do all this for the environment. And then I'm okay with people not being able to afford their next meal, or having to choose between heat or putting food on the table.
They're doing their part, Adam. Can't you see?
They're doing their part. Exactly. This is like some like District 13 Hunger Games society stuff.
Yeah, this is Marie Antoinette stuff. This is like, let them eat cake. Look at how happy they are doing without, because they're doing their part. Yeah.
It's this entire class of folks is just absolutely disjointed. And the fact that that people aren't just repulsed by everything that's going on. Like the fact that Justin Trudeau still has anyone supporting him and the entire country hasn't categorically turned on. I think most of the country very realistically has. But the fact the media is also propping these clowns up and not absolutely deriding them as the lunatics they are. The fact that academic institutions, very often you'll have professor of political science or whatever from such and such university coming on the mainstream media saying that this is required and justifiable and blah 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 blah. It's absolutely repugnant, and there needs to be a fundamental shift broadly within society. Any one of the hundreds of things that the Trudeau government has done, Chrystia Freeland, Justin Trudeau, so on and so forth, you can pretty much name them all. 10 years ago, you would have been done in politics effectively immediately. You would have had to resign. You would have been shown the door. You never would have worked in politics again. Now it's just par for the course. That's how far this country has fallen. And as I mentioned before, I think it's going to take a couple election cycles to get us anywhere back on track. I certainly hope it's not too late, but things are pretty grim under the Trudeau Liberals.
Well, and I think that moves us into our next topic, C11, because there will come a time, if the Liberals have their way, where we can't even talk about what Chrystia Freeland has done to us without facing online censorship. The Bill C11 is it's right now, it's before the Standing Committee on Heritage, and they've heard from 48 witnesses. They're representing organizations during the C11 study, and this excludes the CRTC and government officials. Of those 48, at least 16 have either raised concerns about the regulation of user content in the bill or disputed entirely government claims about its effect. So Bill C11 is basically it's the Online Streaming Act. And what it will do is it will bring these CRTC regulations and plunk them right onto the internet and other streaming platforms. And it will give regulators, who are always government appointed, the ability to force platforms like YouTube, which is the world's second largest platform, to downrank things for certain reasons. And it might be because they will use the excuse, we want Canadian content to be upranked and then served to Canadians. The thing is, a lot of Canadian content is consumed outside of Canada. I saw the director of projects or whatever his name was for YouTube saying, if you do this, you're shrinking the reach of Canadian content because it ends up in front of the eyeballs of Americans organically, and it gets more views just because they're 10 times larger. But but all that aside, what it does is it gives the government the ability to say to these platforms, show this, hide that, for whatever reason.
And we know we're getting shadow banned. We have 1.6 million subscribers on YouTube, and like a video that lots of people are talking about will sometimes get a couple thousand views. It's just statistically almost impossible. Imagine when that gets stepped up to the next level. And just to make that point, I've seen other agencies or sort of other pages or groups snipe reports, like basically record an entire report, put it up, and it'll get 22 million views. That happens. So there's clearly sort of a concerted effort to shadow ban. Imagine once the government has it. This is what's happening behind the scenes, unofficially off the record. Imagine once the government has the sort of rubber stamp and it's official that they are in fact allowed to do this and allowed to shadow ban, allowed to reduce it. You can already see, I'm subscribed to only a couple things on my work YouTube. Our own stuff won't come up. I actually have to search it to find reports that we put out. So if I
said this over the weekend, that when you go onto YouTube, the world's second largest search platform, and you put in Rebel News, your first search results will be critics of us with far fewer views and far fewer subscribers. It won't take you to the 1.6 million subscriber channel. And so while YouTube is already doing this, this really isn't, it is designed to catch YouTube, but YouTube isn't really the target here, because YouTube, as you rightly point out, does this already for political reasons. We know that this is what Google's all about. It's the up and comers, it's the Rumbles, it's the Odysseys, it's the Super U's, it's all those other platforms that exist as a foil, I guess, to YouTube, who don't subscribe to metering untrusted content, who just let the algorithm take over. And if people are watching it, then they serve up more stuff just like that to them.
Yeah.
It's to catch them. It's like how the media bailout was designed to CBCify the rest of the media, to make them compliant and beholden because they need those subsidies. This is the same thing. They're going to YouTubeify all the other platforms. And if they won't go along to get along, they'll do it by force.
Yeah. Yeah. It's shocking and troubling, and it's so counterintuitive. And we saw this. They obviously started with the academic institutions often, and we'll get into this in a second here, but the academic institutions often the sort of bastion of free speech and thought, even when societies fall. You can see this from the various sort of regimes. Often it is the academia that is sort of setting the tone. Well, they were one of the first to go and surrender, in fact, become complicit in pushing this. Now they're going after, now that they control that, now that they control the government, clearly they control mainstream media and the TV. Now they're like, oh, the few outlets that aren't subservient and bending the knee to us, how do we get them? That's what this is all about. It is literally made in order to target Rebel News, Western Standard, True North, those outlets that dare ask a couple tough questions and aren't beholden to the government. Fortunately, however, there definitely seems to be a turning of the tide coming up. And I know that organizations like the Society for Academic Freedom and Scholarship have been advocating for this. But Pierre Poilievre says as Prime Minister, he would appoint a free speech guardian effectively to protect charter rights on campus and revoke federal funding for post-secondary institutions that don't uphold free speech. Now, for progressives out there, if you're extremely alarmed by that, that indicates only that you're completely out of touch with how free societies work. Any sort of idea beyond propagating hate should be up for fair discussion within the university setting. That is the place where people are supposed to encounter all ideas and then sort of formulate their opinions. That is not what is happening in universities today at all. They're ideological forming centers that basically drive its single-handed narratives. And many who survive humanities, myself included, come out of it as critical thinkers in spite of it, not because of it. So to see that the potential ex-prime minister, one of the candidates for the Conservative Party, taking a stand on this issue, I'm sad it took this long. I'm sad the Conservatives went along with this madness for so long under Andrew Scheer and Aaron O'Toole. But these types of talking points, candidates like Dr. Leslie Lewis, Pierre Poilievre, Roman Baber, so on and so forth, they seem to be saying the right things on these issues. And whether they're windsocks who are echoing what they're hearing from people they speak with and what the polls are showing, or whether those are their principles, it does signal that there is indeed a shifting horizon as far as perspectives on this across Canada, as there should be, because the pendulum swing towards totalitarian progressive ideological drive has gone pretty dramatically, and it's time for that swing to come back the other way.
Yeah, there's and the Liberals, if you question them on anything, their standard go-to thing is you are misinformation. Now, it's one thing to call you fake news or a liar, but misinformation, I think, is a different connotation, especially when the government is bringing in legislation to deal with, quote, misinformation. When they say misinformation, translate in your head to speech they are bringing in legislation to censor. And that should make you very worried. We had Liberals in the House of Commons responding to criticism of C11, saying that basically the critics and like the academic critics of C11 are misinformation. And then we have that Liberal, Pablo Rodriguez. He's the heritage minister. He's the guy bringing this legislation in, having a literal conniption in the House of Commons because the Liberals aren't rolling over, or I'm sorry, the Conservatives aren't rolling over and going along with the NDP to support this bill. They're actually doing something to fight for free speech, which I'm not sure they would be doing if Aaron O'Toole were still the boss. Maybe we can show that clip.
Mr. Speaker, everyone knows that the Conservative, when they wake up in the morning, they think about filibustering, Mr. Speaker.
That's right.
And they go, when they go to bed at night, they think about filibustering, Mr. Speaker. And what do they do in between? They filibuster, Mr. Speaker. That's what they do. They've abandoned their creators, they've abandoned our artists, and they've abandoned our culture, Mr. Speaker.
screaming and wave. That's not an argument. That's just a madman in the House of Commons. It's the kind of guy that if you saw him performing like that on the street, you'd call security. You'd be like, hi, cops, there's a crazy person on the street. But look at him. He's so furious that they're not going to let him stomp on the free speech rights of Canadians that he's losing his mind in the House of Commons.
Well, and the sort of sick, sad thing is, I mean, I think these people believe it, some of them. Obviously, some of the higher officials, they don't believe it. They're happy and just trying to seize control. But it is just shocking how Orwellian this stuff is. You and I have certainly developed an ear for it. I think many of our viewers likely have as well. But even with COVID-19, you could see the terms they would start to use, and they'd say it 2 or 3 times. It's not your third dose. It's up to date now. This is misinformation. They literally have these Orwellian board meetings about new speak and the types of words that everyone should be using to get into people's heads and getting into their heads, that this is the new language moving forward. This is something that happens within the Liberal Party. I can almost guarantee you, and in fact, we can ATIP the emails where they're saying this is the new terminology that we're going to be using. So watch out for that. If all of a sudden you see Trudeau, Freeland, and Tam or someone else saying these sort of buzzwords, that's something that they're working on. It isn't just them coincidentally saying that. It's one of their new speak words that means something. There's part of one of their campaigns. And misinformation, disinformation, they lie all the time. And it's almost like during the Ottawa protests that were taking place, when the Ottawa police, every tweet they basically put out was the opposite of the truth. It was categorical misinformation. But they're saying that the other stuff, the true reports on the ground, things that were verifiable by camera, verifiable by people, verifiable by boots on the ground, they're calling those facts misinformation. And some of them aren't opinions. They're literally, here's a shot of what happened. Nope, that's misinformation. And here's a story that counteracts all evidence placed before you. And sadly, in 1984 fashion, people believe that. They believe they're at war with Eurasia or whatever. They're just embracing and believing this wholeheartedly when it's self-evidently counterintuitive to the facts. So I think Canadians need to wake up to this sentiment. It's not a cliche to say that we're living in this Orwellian society, or at least the onset on it, because they seem to have taken it, as our shirt says from the Rebel News Store, as an instruction manual. That's not the intent. It was intended as a cautionary tale, but not surprising from a guy who admires China's basic dictatorship. Yeah.
It's a strange time to be alive when free speech is hate speech, when isolating from your friends and family and calling the cops on your neighbor is public health. I mean, it's just, you look how quickly they flipped all the meanings of the common parlance, and people just went along because they were so fear washed by it all.
Yeah. And another story that ties into that very well, if you don't have anything else to add in, is some of the madness that we have seen with biological males who have the categorical sort of skeletal and testosterone advantages participating in women's sports. It's obviously been headline news right across the world. And as far as how you deal with this situation, do you create separate leagues? Do you make accommodations? Do you set certain thresholds for testosterone levels? Who knows? But clearly there is a large portion of society likely in line with this that doesn't want anything in place, and they would simply believe that, oh well, whatever you identify as. Dave Chappelle does a bit on it where he says, well, if LeBron James suddenly identifies as a female, he's going to get 50,000 baskets in the WNBA. Clearly there has to be some metric of sensibility, and FINA has decided to restrict transgender athletes in elite women's swimming, and they're hoping that other people will sort of follow their blueprint. No doubt they're going to be marginalized and vilified for bringing in this common sense restriction and limitation program so that people simply cannot be dominated. I'm sorry to break it to people out there, but there is a biological difference between men and women. Men are generally going to be stronger, and in a large majority of sports that involve physicality, There's different leagues for a reason. It's very rare that women can compete in those men's professional leagues. So there's a separation for that reason. So someone transitioning over, whether it's I can't remember the name. There was an MMA athlete who pulverized, who was trans, who pulverized a female athlete. We've seen swimmers absolutely dominating. So there has to be some sort of metric in place there. That's common sense. Trudeau would probably call it misinformation or hate speech. But I think for anyone out there sober-minded, even if you're trans, you should be like, well, there has to be some metric in place.
Yeah. I mean, and it's funny that the movement to change this is actually coming from swimming. Where are the contact sports people on this issue? And I don't want to make this like a disgruntled thing about me, so I'm not going to talk about my experience with this. But where are the contact sports people? This is highly dangerous for young girls to be playing contact sports against males who have gone through testosterone puberty. Outside of the unfair competition, the size of a male heart versus a female heart, and the size of their lungs and their bone density and their weight, their musculature. Outside of that, a 250-pound male barreling at a 16-year-old girl. Where are the contact sports people on this?
But Sheila, obviously that's like a theoretical example. That hasn't really happened, has it?
No. This is just a complete
this didn't happen
theoretical.
this weekend. Completely theoretical.
Completely
and
theoretical.
It's just the most sort of caricaturistic emblem. Why is all of this sort of ridiculous double speak nonsense, like an F1 driver sponsored by a sort of oligarchical oil company, the Saudis, criticizing oil, Freeland and Trudeau, who jet set around the world and are among the biggest emitters, criticizing emissions. They no doubt, I doubt the hundreds of thousands of dollars they managed to spend on booze on these flights. They're probably not drinking reusable and washable cups. I'm sure there's quite a bit of garbage being generated from all this, and right across the board to this, like, oh yeah, no, that is 100% a girl. We don't need to ask any questions. It doesn't matter that their shoulders are as broad as Adam's and they're clearly enjoying an identified advantage on the field. And it's so we talked about sort of academics are clearly on board with this type of nonsense, but we even saw the media editing photos of trans athletes to make them look more feminine, right, to sort of justify this absurd narrative. So you have the government, you have academia, and you have the media complicit in this sort of absurd cover-up of something that signals that they know they're wrong. The fact that they're photoshopping something to color the story signals an underlying guilt. They wouldn't be doing that if they didn't know there was something to it. Furthermore, the academics and the government unwilling to engage in conversations about whether or not it's fair that someone who enjoys biological advantages should just be able to participate where they want. The fact that they won't engage in that factual and self-evidenced conversation speaks to the fact that they know they're engaged in spreading misinformation, to use their terminology, and that if this comes under any sort of scrutiny or anyone looks at it objectively, there's going to be problems. I, for one, say kudos to the swimmers and the swimming organizations for having the cojones. I'm surprised they fit inside Speedos to put this down on paper and get it done. Someone's got to do it, and we left it to the swimmers. It's the swimmers, the truckers, you know what I mean? It's not the academics, not the professors, not this, not that. It's these sort of people who just can tell something's wrong and decide to do something right, who are taking a stand.
Where are the feminists? As you know, girls, female athletes are put in danger and have their spots stolen by mediocre men. Where are the feminists? I don't know.
They get called fascists, like Rowling TERFs. You get vilified, and we've lost dialogue very much in society. It's all these sensible conversations that we could have and should have. Listen, wherever someone is on these spectrums, as long as they're not propagating hate, being violent, issuing threats, those types of things, I'm so happy to have a respectful conversation with anyone, even on the polar opposite of the spectrum. But the fact is, they're not willing to have these conversations. They won't sit down for an interview. They won't come to the table. They very much are saying, listen, the government, the academics, everyone's on my side, the mainstream media. I don't have to talk to you. I can just force my way on you, and you have to accept it. Otherwise, we're all going to get together and brand you a fascist, try and shadow ban or officially ban your platform and ruin your lives. And that's something we have to get away from.
Yeah. It's always activists with no actual tie or interest in the sport who are happy to ruin the sport for your daughter.
Yep.
Anyway, we've got quite a fair number of chats here to get to. Adam Ottawa gives us $1 and says, if you read the single-use plastics bill correctly, Canada will still be allowed to produce the products for export. Just Canadians won't be allowed to use them. There's weird things in that bill. I was reading it before I came on. I'm going to do a video on it for tomorrow. The labeling and the treatment of like plastic straws where they're going to have to be in a store. Just crazy. Just like crazy.
Like up with the smokes and the adult mags. Give me some of those.
Adam, literally, they're over the counter, like Sudafed.
You go in all ashamed.
Yeah, they are going to keep them like the pills that you use to make meth, right?
Yeah.
Like the blister packs of pills that you use to make meth that are behind the counter. That's where the straws are going to be, and you have to give a good reason for needing them.
That's I want them. That's my reason. Give me my straws.
Yeah.
Get it squirted out. Oh man, is that real? That can't be real. That's ridiculous.
It's real.
Oh,
I'll
man.
go through the bill in my video. I've already given too much away, but
Jeez.
yeah. The government that legalized hard drugs is treating your straws like cigarettes.
Like hard drugs.
Yeah.
I can go get some
straws.
free meth, but I can't drink a Diet Coke through a straw.
Legalized straws. Annalisa, 1964. Annalisa has David Menzies in the bloodstream. She gives us $10 and says, I've missed you. Lots of amazing videos as usual. Keep up the great work. Well, thanks, Annalisa. Make sure you tune in tomorrow with David Menzies. Paul Otto Newman gives us $1. What if paper straws were coated in beeswax? Would that be a possible way to preserve them during use so that they do not dissolve? Oh, but then they wouldn't be vegan, and then they get people mad at you.
And they would probably affect the taste a little bit. And the bees are busy. Everyone knows that we need more bees. They're overburdened, overworked.
We already have plastic. Just use plastic.
Yeah.
Why are we inventing all these weird things to make a paper straw behave like a plastic straw? Just use the plastic.
If only we could come up with like a substance that was readily available, recyclable, didn't develop any taste, didn't deteriorate, inert. If there's something like that, safe, easy to produce, affordable, if we could even develop a super fabric material, something like that, that could resolve all our problems.
Yeah. What kind of space age material might that be?
Yeah, I don't know. But you can keep dreaming.
Scott Not 2 T's gives us $5. Government sponsored news is gross. Get the truth with gun and sauce. Yes. Very good. Thank you. Very good, sir. Paul Otto Newman gives us $5. Does Rebel News Plus the Western Standard Plan? Oh, does Rebel News and the Western Standard Plan, or perhaps you're thinking about hosting a UCP leadership debate through the Independent Press Gallery? I think the APP might be hosting one. Someone will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the Alberta Prosperity Project, today's show sponsor, is trying to organize a UCP leadership debate. And I do know that as far as the federal Conservatives, Western Standard canceled theirs because Pierre Poilievre wouldn't agree to come. But then they said, you know what, who cares? We're just going to host it anyway. So theirs is back on for July. I think it's July 8th. So we'll be there in full force for that. They've invited us to come and ask all the questions that the candidates can handle from us here at Rebel News. So the whole team will be there. Then we've got Aquaskies 3636. 15 minutes ago, Macron lost his majority. Israel looking at an election. Israel's always in a constant state of election. Just bring back a Bibi. It's their parliamentary system, the Knesset, with all the like minor parties and regional parties, and it's very complicated. There's a lot of horse trading and Pokemon cards involved to make a stable government there. So I don't know. I wouldn't be mad if they went back to election and then maybe they didn't have Bennett as their leader anymore. Canada needs common sense and fast. Thank you to you both. Love Rebel. Thank you. Aquaskies 3636 gives us $1. Saw a charming clip of Rex Murphy's comments regarding Rebel News and Ezra. Love it. You are so appreciated, Rebel News. We're lucky to have you. Thanks. Now, that was Rex had some nice things to say about this. You know what? Do we have that clip? Can we show it? I'll give you a second to dig it up while I read the next comment. And then we've got one from Aquaskies 3636. A buck says, plastic bans here in Vancouver. Ridiculous. Common sense, please. I love plastic. I want to be an advocate for if I were not a journalist, I would probably work in media relations for the plastics industry. I absolutely love plastic. And I love learning about plastic and all the things that it can do and all the jobs that it creates and all the value it adds to the Canadian economy. And the more the Liberals hate it, the more I love it. It's just sort of that like inverse effect. I'm up here when they get down there. I love it. Do we have the clip of Rex Murphy? Perfect.
And that's this table here, where you see General Ezra and the Praetorian Guard. I know two things of great confidence, that if anything from the necrotic mainstream media were to break it in now, the Praetorian Guard would be on them in a flash. And secondly, I think it needs saying out loud because so many other darker missiles fly his way. I'll put it in straight language. His constant, abrasive, annoying, and extremely aggressive presence in the Canadian media is one of the most necessary things that we have.
Box getting a little love there. He's been pretty cooped up in Toronto the last 2 years. And, you sort of end up, I don't know, when you're not out there in the world, it's different. We're out here in Canada and you get the love when you go to the grocery store. You get the love when you go to Canadian Tire, get your skate sharpened, whatever. People are like wanting to talk to you about the work that you do. Maybe it's a little different in Toronto. But it's nice to know that even someone as esteemed as Rex Murphy, with his wonderful turn of phrase, the necrotic mainstream media, he knows that, sometimes Ezra's prickly, but he does it all in the interest of Canadians and transparency and truth.
Well, heaven forbid there be a prickly journalist out there holding politicians to account. Often prickly is a name holder for someone who asks good questions. So I think that's very often the case. But yeah, no lack of folks coming up to us, talking to us on the street, whether it's downtown Calgary, bar, small town, and Ezra Levant's name no doubt often comes up. So yeah, very, very glad to hear Rex honoring him. But for people out there who maybe don't know, everything that we do effectively is by an extension of the sort of effort that Ezra has put into setting this up. So glad to hear that all the work he's done is being acknowledged by some of these significant historical Canadian figures.
With that all being said, I think that brings us to the end of the show. Maybe, Olivia, we can go out on Kian's clip from Church in the Vine, just so people can see we've been selling out movie theaters, but movie theaters seat about 270, 275. We filled a church that seats over 600 with people on Friday nights for our family-friendly showing of Kian's trucker documentary. So maybe we'll go out on that. But before we go, let's just thank everybody. Adam, thanks for co-hosting the show with me today from the office in Calgary. Despite our interruptions and our technical difficulties, I think everything went well. Thanks, Olivia and the gang in the office in Toronto for putting the show together behind the scenes, and all the web editors and web team to make sure that the show is available for everybody to click on and then watch. Thanks to everybody who pitched in to keep the lights on. Thanks to everybody at home who watches to make us Canada's largest independent media company. And as David Menzies always says, stay sane.
And blessed from the bottom of our hearts to be able to partner with Sheila Gunn Reid and the entire Rebel News team. I see some of you got your popcorn and your pop and your chips already. Apologies that our machine was not able to keep up with the demand. So thank you for patience. The popcorn is continuing to come. So give it a little bit of time and then go check again. You are in for a treat tonight. Yes,